Once there was a boy who grew up on the streets, set forth on a hard road of trouble. He fought the streets and took control of his life, just in time to see it destroyed. Framed for a crime he did not commit, the boy went to prison and became a man. Today, we're talking about the hero formerly known as Power Man, now simply called Cage. Welcome to the Number One Comics Podcast. This is the only podcast dedicated to the review and discussion of first issues. My name is Jonah. With me is Bill. Hello, Bill.
How you doing?
And as I'd mentioned, we are talking about Cage, Luke Cage, that is. Bill,
Yes.
You like yourself some Cage?
I do.
Where did you meet Cage at?
So I never read the Power Man and Iron Fist comics back in the day.
Yeah.
I knew of them from Marvel trading cards, of course. I think my first introduction really to Cage was the Netflix series.
Okay.
And then I started going back and like kind of revisiting the character, his interactions with Spider-Man, the like new Avengers, that sort of stuff. So yeah, I really dig the character. This is the first time I'd actually read this though.
Oh, his actual kind of series. I would call it a mini series because I think a mini series is like 6 issues. This was intended as a long going or as an ongoing. It just wasn't a very long ongoing, unfortunately, which we'll talk about. But yeah, my first introduction to Cage was, I think I'd mentioned it. I know I've mentioned this before, but it was Punisher issue 60, where Punisher is trying to evade the police. He goes to a coked out plastic surgeon who looks more like a prostitute. I'm not really sure what she was.
Yeah.
And she turns him into a black man. He then leaves New York, goes to Chicago, and runs across Cage. They clean up some streets together over the course of like 3 issues, and then he fades back to his Caucasian self, and then they kind of part ways.
Yeah.
And right after that, because I was already... That was really the first Punisher comics I bought when I was a kid. I don't know what the draw was necessarily. But that's where I started reading the Punisher. And then right after that is when this came out. Okay. Because this series kind of dovetailed right out of that. So I was all over this number one as soon as it came out. And I was a big fan. I mean, I was, 11 years old? Because I guess let's go back. I was 11 years old because this comic, published by Marvel Comics, has a cover date of April of 1992. So I would have been 11 years old when this came out. Cover price on this, $1.50. Writer, Mark McLaurin, and artist, Dwayne Turner. I'm admittedly not familiar with those names or other things that they may have worked on just based on the names alone. The character of Luke Cage first appeared back in 1972 in the series called Luke Cage, Hero for Hire. In issue 17, or with issue 17, it was renamed Power Man. And then it was renamed again Power Man and Iron Fist. Like you, I had no idea that comic even existed. Pre-internet, again, when you're 10 or 11 years old and you go to the comic shop, I wasn't really going through the bargain bins, or I don't know if bargain bins were a thing or if it was just the back issue bins. Yeah. But I didn't know that even existed until years later. Right. The series ran up to issue 125 and ended in 1986. And that is awesome and wild to me that series would run for that long. Yeah. In the series finale, Iron Fist is seemingly killed. And again, going into Cage, I did not know that Iron Fist was a character until reading this book. And he is essentially, spoiler alert, revealed to not be dead. And I was introduced to Iron Fist in this title as well. Yeah. Now, on a side note, the last writer on that Power Man and Iron Fist series was Jim Owsley. Owsley, I think is how it's pronounced. But that is actually, AKA, it's Christopher Priest, who we talked about. He was the writer on the U.S. Agent miniseries that we discussed. Right. And actually, I was just pulling out another Christopher Priest book that we're probably going to take a look at in the near future. He's always been a pretty prolific writer over the years, and so I'm sure we're going to encounter him again a few more times as we go through this show. This series, just simply titled Cage now, is his second attempt, not his as in Christopher Priest's, but Luke Cage's second attempt at a self-titled series. Like I said, I was first introduced to Cage and Punisher. This title came out shortly after, would have been like probably right after like Punisher issue 62, maybe, I think, is when that kind of 3-issue story arc had ended and they'd gone their separate ways. Because of its relatively short run, this was the first actual comic series that I was able to complete an entire run of. Which I think that's probably one reason why I'm such a big fan of it, is because that nostalgia aspect of it. Like, this is the first one that I was able to actually complete as a kid.
Yeah.
Anything else on Cage before we dive into the issue itself?
I don't think so.
What'd you think of the actor that played Cage? What did you think of his portrayal in that role?
I really, even especially after going back and like reading some of, maybe that's where I went wrong, is that I watched the series first.
Yeah.
And now, like, in my head, every time I see him talking on the page, I hear that guy's voice. I really liked his portrayal of Cage, though. I also liked Mahershala Ali in there. I think he was one of the antagonists in there. I can't remember his name off the top of my head.
Was it Diamondback?
I think it was Diamondback.
Yeah. That sounds right.
But yeah, I love the acting in the series.
Yeah.
I always kind of, I guess, pictured Luke Cage as sounding kind of like what is it, Michael J. White that did
the Spawn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of expected him to kind of sound that kind of like rough and gruff kind of little character.
Yeah, I always
like kind of the deeper voice, I guess.
I always pictured him as kind of sound like a, and this might go back to not so much from this, but when I have had a chance to go back and look at some of the old Power Man and Iron Fist books, it was really diving into the whole blaxploitation thing at the time. So characters like Shaft. So for whatever reason, like in my head, it's just like Richard Roundtree to me. But I do think that the actor that portrayed him in the series did an excellent job. I always thought Terry Crews would kind of be a cool Cage as well. He's at least, he's big. He's got the size thing for sure. But no, I thought he did a good job. I thought the series was actually pretty good overall. It wasn't too bad. Not my favorite of the Marvel series that Netflix did. I think that still goes to like Daredevil and Punisher. Yeah. And I think Jessica Jones would probably be even one above that. And then you'd have like Luke Cage, Iron Fist at the bottom, because I thought that one was pretty terrible.
Yeah.
But anyway, I mean, it's a kung fu show and the kid doesn't even know kung fu is some bullshit.
Yeah.
Enough about that for right now. Let's go ahead and dive into this title itself. We are going to start with the cover. On the cover, we have our titular character front and center, not even realizing it at the time, but he is tearing apart his old costume and showing us his new look. The background is filled in with scenes and images from inside the story, which I actually think is very, very cool. And that's not something that I recall seeing on the cover of other comics.
Right.
But I like that because it kind of reminds me of like almost like a 1980s like intro to like a 1980s show that I watched with my parents or something.
Right.
It was very cool. On the cover, we see some of his supporting cast, such as Dakota North. She's a PI. We've got a newspaper photographer named Mickey Hamilton, and we also see the featured villain, Hardcore. Like I said, it does. It reminds me of, or maybe like an old B-movie poster too. Yeah. And again, kind of tying in with those, those Shaft type roots. I like that. It's very cool. Yeah. Let's see, where was I? Oh, on the cover, unlike covers nowadays, where you have just the character and there's really no background, and you have things that maybe is on the cover that don't even appear in the issue, which drives me insane. This cover stands out as much different from any of those. I really, really do like this cover.
Yeah.
Let's get into the issue itself. We open with a splash page of Cage getting submerged in a bubbling, steaming green liquid. Looks a lot like toxic waste. The narrator fills us in that Cage was doing time at Seagate Prison for narcotics charges when he volunteered for a medical experiment. It was for an opportunity at early parole, but something went wrong. Now, on the following page, that same narrator, private investigator Dakota North, is continuing to explain to a group of newspaper executives, and by extension explain to us as the reader as well, that the experiment had amazing side effects, superhuman strength, and steel-hard skin. With those powers, he adopted the name Luke Cage, and out of prison, he set up a freelance hero-for-hire operation. He eventually teamed up with Iron Fist, but their hero-for-hire operation crashed when Cage was set up and jailed for Iron Fist's murder. Cage escaped, and the charges were eventually dropped. Cage had dropped out of sight at this time, though, until just recently when he resurfaced in Chicago. The newspaper plans on going national, and similar to the Daily Bugle, how they use Spider-Man, their plan is to use Luke Cage to give their paper some national attention. Now they just need to find him. We cut to another splash page of Cage single-handedly taking on 4 men. He's been hired to protect a group of strikers on their picket line, and the guys had just shown up to start some shit. One guy pulls out a gun and fires 2 shots right into Cage's chest. They clearly hadn't heard of him or hadn't heard that he's got bulletproof skin. As he picks 2 of the aggressors up by their shirts, a steel chain is thrown and wraps around his arms. The chain is taserized. His words, not mine. I don't know if that's even a word. And it shocks him with electricity. Cage is able to break the chain into pieces. Cage detects that the chain was thrown from a van nearby, which is now speeding towards him. Cage leaps out of the way, shielding a bystander in the process. The men who had been attacking him, they attempt to escape by piling into the back of the van, but Cage is right on top of them. He punches through the back and tears the rear doors off. The men attack him again. One calls out to the driver, a man named Hardcore. He's wearing a purple jumpsuit and chainmail, which makes him look a little more like Prince as opposed to a supervillain. Even though Hardcore is driving, he decides that it's up to him to teach Mr. Cage a lesson. He throws another chain, this one wrapping around Cage's waist. Hardcore calls the chain a manrakisa. Again, I'm probably mispronouncing that. They're also called, Kusarja, a Kusaria Fundo, I think is the term for it. Mm-hmm. It is an ancient weapon used in feudal Japan. Anyway, according to like Wikipedia. And according to Wikipedia as well, now that I think about it, carrying one of those in Massachusetts is considered a felony. I don't know. I thought that was very strange that they would single that out. But anyway, Hardcore remarks that some of his chains are outfitted with tasers, others explosives. At that reveal, this sends the other fellow thugs who are in the back of the van leaping out of it. Hardcore jump kicks the hero in the face and then punches him, all while waxing poetic about how raw strength is powerless against water. I don't really know. That's what he says. The explosives in the chain detonate, and Cage is blown out of the back of the van and onto the street. The men who had bailed out before the explosion try to run away, but Cage hurls a manhole cover right into their backs. Then the police arrive, and then the media. Cage is approached by Jaron Hogarth, He used to work with Heroes for Hire. He was like their attorney, and now he serves as legal counsel for the Chicago Spectator paper, and he has a proposition for Cage. That afternoon, the paper's editor confides in Mickey Hamilton, a photographer, that she is not comfortable attaching Cage's name to the paper, but it's not her call. Outside the home of a man named Angelopoulos, or I think just Angel for short going forward, we're outside of his home. It's an estate. Hardcore is there. He's in a Jeep with Angel, the homeowner. And Hardcore, he's using what looks like a rocket launcher to essentially blow Angel's home to smithereens. With Angel being quote-unquote dead, all of his holdings will transfer to Hardcore's boss, while Angel sets up a new life elsewhere. At the offices of the paper, Cage is briefed that the man behind the strikebreakers that morning was none other than Angelopoulos. Angelopoulos built a massive corporation, but ended up in the pocket of the mobsters. The paper plans to send in Cage to Angel's home before the cops get there to arrest him. Angel has enough firepower to ensure that he either is not going to be taken alive or is at least he's not going to go out alone. So they want essentially Cage to go in and get him first. It'll save a lot of police and it'll give them some really good press. The meeting is interrupted with them being notified that their target has bolted to his airstrip with an unknown companion. Now, just so happens they've got a chopper on the roof standing by and ready to go. So we have Mickey, the photographer, and Cage. They're in the helicopter. Mickey tells Cage that he knows who he used to be, and he even knows who Cage's parents are. The helicopter arrives at the airstrip where they see Angel's jet. They spot the man with him. It's Hardcore. Hardcore hurls another Manrikisa at it, and it wraps around the helicopter's rotor mast. Cage grabs Mickey and pulls him out of the helicopter, and they fall through the trees just as the helicopter explodes overhead. Cage lands hard on his back with Mickey right on top of him. Mickey warns Cage that he doesn't have to go after them. Hardcore already trashed Cage once. Cage, though, he rebuts, saying that he's got to finish this. Moments later, Cage tosses a fence pole through the windshield of Hardcore's Jeep. Cage charges the Jeep as Hardcore quotes the 19th century poet Longfellow. The Jeep and the hero crash. The Jeep itself, it goes kind of careening onto its side, and the men and the weapon crates that were in the back of it, they're tossed out. Cage grabs Angel and tosses him into the Jeep while also turning the Jeep back onto its four tires. He then turns his attention to Hardcore when Hardcore, he's got another one of those taserized Manrikisas, and it wraps around Cage's neck and electrocutes him. Hardcore tells Cage he not only possesses a number of weapons with deadly modern modifications, but he also has mastery over his mind and body. Hardcore removes his glove, revealing razor-sharp fingernails that are sharp enough to penetrate steel. He also kind of looks like a drag queen in this picture, in this image, if I recall correctly. So it can penetrate steel or Cage's steel-hard skin. Hardcore swipes at Cage, and the villain taunts him. He even calls him Power Man. This pisses Cage off. He's like, "Don't call me that. My name is Cage." And he whacks Hardcore away and calls him dog food. With Cage and Hardcore fighting it out, Angel tries to escape in the Jeep. However, Mickey hops off of a fence and into the Jeep with Angel. Hardcore gets Cage's attention again by throwing two bullet-like Sanjinrai into his shoulders. They pierce his bulletproof skin. Hardcore asks, how long has it been since Cage has felt that? Not just the pain, but the penetration. It's a really weird thing to say to a guy who just got out of prison.
Right.
But anyway, Hardcore begins spinning one of his Manrikisas above his head and giving Cage the choice. Go after him or save his friend. If he hurls the explosive chain at the Jeep, it and all of whatever explosive cargo is left in the back would detonate. Cage grabs a chunk of asphalt from the ground and he hurls it in the air just as Hardcore releases his grip on the chain. The chunk of rock and the spinning weapon collide above their heads and explodes. The explosive cargo that had previously spilled out had been laying around them. It also explodes. In the Jeep, Mickey socks Angel. He is tossed from the Jeep, but not before jamming the accelerator, which requires Mickey to bail out as well. To no one's surprise, surviving the explosion, Hardcore and Cage, they're both pretty much unscathed. Hardcore attempts a getaway. He goes to the airplane, but Cage is right on his tail. Hardcore tries to slow Cage down, but the hero is able to use one of the rocket launchers from the cargo that hadn't detonated to blast a hole in the runway. Cage then leaps onto the plane and essentially tears the back of it off, I guess is what he does. Hardcore slings more of his steel-penetrating projectiles at Cage, but Cage is able to deflect them with a torn chunk of the plane's tail, essentially. Then we see the unmanned Jeep that is hurtling towards them because that accelerator pedal had been stuck to the floor, essentially. The Jeep explodes. Hardcore is still in the moving plane as it crashes into the tree line, which also explodes. Now, that evening, Angel is taken into custody. Mickey and Cage, they shake on their agreement to work with one another. The paper will cover nationwide advertising expenses for his Hero for Hire gig, and in exchange, they're going to get exclusives on all of his cases. Later that week, Hardcore is seen in St. Croix. He's standing before his boss. While his boss views Hardcore as having failed, Hardcore disagrees, saying that Angel's loose end is still going to be tied up, and Cage thinks that Hardcore is dead. Their plan to crush Cage is still in the works when the time is right. And that's where we end the issue with, no doubt, Hardcore is going to return. Bill, what are your thoughts?
I think it does have kind of an interesting premise to it. I like the fact that they're kind of wanting to use Cage as their poster boy a little bit.
Yep.
You know, kind of like J. Jonah Jameson uses Spider-Man, even though he hates him.
Yep.
So I did like that. Hardcore, stupid name, stupid outfit, but a pretty cool villain altogether.
He is a cool villain.
I like the weaponry he uses, stuff like that. I think it's always cool when you see, like, you know, the big guys, like the heavy hitters of the Marvel Universe, take on people who are like dancing circles around them. And you know, if they just land one good punch to them, they're probably, you know, turned into red paste. But that never happens.
Yeah, Hardcore is interesting because he gets the upper hand on Cage kind of early on, when Cage, I don't think he really knows what he's dealing with Hardcore. And then in the end, you know, towards the end of the issue, Cage wins, Hardcore loses. And so you kind of think, oh, maybe he's not much of the threat that he claims to be. But then in that last scene with Hardcore where he's talking to his boss, he actually just cold-bloodedly kills another dude who's like there, like with his bare hands, like with his little razor sharp fingernails. And so you're like, oh yeah, maybe he's kind of a badass, but he's so goofy looking.
Right.
It's hard for me to get past the purple and chainmail costume.
He definitely kind of like talks with that kind of Creole.
He is from the island of St. Croix, so he talks like from, I believe that's where he's from, and so he talks like he's from there, which is interesting because I think that depending on how that is written, I can see that going like horribly wrong from like a readership. I mean, I read it just fine, and but I could see how that could come across as like real bad depending on who's writing it.
Yeah.
But I think it was fine here.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah. The thing with me with this issue is, and I was a fan of this series. I picked this up every month. I think the first issue as a first issue holds up relatively well as a first issue, but it is showing its age as a comic from the 90s.
Right.
for better or for worse. That might irk some people. Some people might take a nostalgia bath in that, but it is definitely a very 90s comic.
Yeah.
Where I think it works really well as a first issue, regardless of the decade, is you've got the first few pages that are the recap pages. So anyone who picks this up who doesn't know shit about Power Man or Luke Cage, they're pretty quickly filled in on who he is, where his powers came from, what his deal is, essentially. And so we're really quickly given the setup for the premise as well. Like you said, with the newspaper, they want to exploit Cage's heroics to further their own brand recognition. Like, all of that's set up in like the first 2 or 3 pages, which I think is really well done, especially for someone who may be coming to this as a brand new reader. I do think it's funny that Cage makes it clear several times that he's down to be their hero as long as the paycheck's good. Like, he's very much, for lack of a better term, more mercenary than the hero that he becomes. When you started reading him in New Avengers, it was not necessarily about the paycheck.
Right.
It was about protecting his family, protecting his friends, doing what's right. But at this time, it was more as like, hey, as long as the money's good, I'm down to be your hero. So.
Right.
It's funny because between the initial brawl on the picket line and that explosive finale, we've also got plenty of action throughout. You don't always have that with a first issue. I mean, there is still a good bit of setup, but there's still quite a bit of action in this, which I think was really well done. Yeah, it is. The art itself is very stock 90s Marvel art. And we've seen this before with books like Darkhawk and Sleepwalker. And I think that it's fine. It's good. It's serviceable. It tells the story. It's I think at times it's a lot better than some of the art we get with some books that I've seen even today. So I really enjoy the art in this. It had always appealed to me as a kid.
Well, I think it was so important with the first issue, especially if you're coming back to a character that's been kind of MIA for a while. You can put those little text bubbles inside the front cover that explain their history all you want, but it's better for me to see it. Yeah. I'm a very, when it comes to comics, I'm a very visual reader. Like, I want the visuals to go with it so I can like kind of picture it better in my head. They do that really well with this, and I think they didn't necessarily do that with more well-established characters.
Right.
In the 90s especially, it seemed like everyone was getting their own standalone comic book. For maybe not at the time this was, but I remember there being like a Rogue miniseries.
Yeah,
which is like the most random character out of the X-Men to pick.
Yeah, and this is a top. We'll have this discussion another time, I'm sure, but I think any number of X-Men characters getting their own series outside of, say, a Wolverine is very strange to me. Yeah. Like, I don't think... It's different when you've got individual characters who form a team, but they were individual characters first, essentially. That's very different than when you have a team that then gets these like weird little individual books. And they did that a lot in the 90s, you're right. Not just even with X-Men, but New Mutants. Or not New Mutants, New Warriors.
New Warriors.
Night Thrasher had his own miniseries and ongoing. Nova had an ongoing, and I liked both of those. I was huge fans of those characters. I think it worked more well with some than others, but yeah, every character was getting his own series back in the 90s.
Right.
For sure. I think it's funny. One thing I like about this comic, and I was thinking about this when I was doing my notes, especially because we just talked a few weeks ago when we reviewed or discussed the 2006 Moon Knight. And just how, especially in the 2000s, how decompressed all of those comics are. I mean, take Moon Knight for an example, and we really enjoyed that issue, but you don't have a whole story.
Right.
You have a glimpse, or you're given a piece of a story, and you have to read, which is why, they're essentially written for trade paperback. You got to read all 5 or 6 issues to get the whole story, to kind of know what's going on. With something like this, it's all really crammed into one issue with instead of just a tease, you get almost a complete story, beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah.
You do get a little bit of a tease at the end, sort of planting seeds for what's to come, but there's enough here where someone could easily have picked this up and be like, okay, I know Cage, I know what's going on, I'm good. They have a whole story in hand, and I actually like that. I like when comics would tell a complete story in those 22 or so pages, and I know, I don't know how realistic that is anymore, but
I think
there's something I like about that.
Just about everything now seems like it's written for the sole purpose of selling a omnibus or a graphic novel of it at some point.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But.
Right. Well, and even now, so it was, in the 2000s, everything was like a 6-issue story arc, and then your trade paperback was 6 issues. Now everything is like a 5-issue story arc, and you're getting a 5-issue trade paperback now for about the same price as the 6-issue trade paperback, sadly.
Yeah.
And so it's a little less decompressed because they have one less issue to try and tell that story in.
Yeah.
But it's still not like it was necessarily back in the early 90s, unfortunately. I think that, for me, the biggest weak point of this issue was hardcore. And we've talked a little bit about it as a credible threat because with any hero, it's the old adage that the hero is really only as good as their villains are. And I think that that's one way that Luke Cage has always been lacking.
Yeah.
Is he's always had in my opinion, he's always had a weak rogues gallery. And it's not just Luke Cage. A lot of those characters from the 90s, a lot of the characters that I love from the 90s don't really have a good rogues gallery. Mm-hmm. Darkhawk, Sleepwalker, we've talked about those guys. They don't really have a strong rogues gallery.
Yeah.
Ghost Rider was around the same time. He's got probably the strongest rogues gallery of all of those kind of early 90s not necessarily new characters, but new titles coming around.
Yeah.
You have Deathlock. Name me one of Deathlock's rogues.
Yeah.
I've got a whole issue of Deathlock comics, and I couldn't tell you what one of his arch enemies' names is because I don't know that he really has any, at least none that really stand out. Right. And I think that was really one of the reasons why some of these characters are not as impactful today as they were then. Sleepwalker barely makes appearances. Darkhawk barely makes appearances, and now it's usually in some sort of some sort of galactic outer space crisis.
Right.
Cage has, of all of these kind of early 90s characters that I, for lack of a better term, grew up with, he's had kind of the most legs. And a lot of that had to do with just how Bendis used him back in the early 2000s in Alias and in New Avengers, where he became kind of a major player as an Avenger, and he's still a player today, a little bit less today than where he was at, 10, 15 years ago, but he's still around today. In fact, let's talk a little bit about sort of what came next for Mr. Cage. Sadly, as I'd said, this series, some people call it a mini-series. I think it was an ongoing, but it was not very popular. It did not sell well, and so they ended up canceling with issue 20. And there were, I think, some gems of stories in here. One of my favorite stories in here, he does team up with Punisher again at some point in his run, but there's also one where he takes on the Rhino, and I really like that. In fact, I love that image of him kind of like grabbing the Rhino by the horns and taking him to the ground. I think that's a really cool image. Like I said, I enjoyed all 20 issues of it. Is it Pulitzer Prize winning stuff, or is it not Pulitzer, but whatever, comic book award winning stuff? Right. Probably not, but it's enjoyable. This version of the character, he did look and sound much different than like the 70s version when I'd gone back and read some of that. Yeah. And again, I think that was just a lot of the, his creation at the time. Both, just like that 70s version was a product of its time, so was the 90s version was a product of its time. Aside from the appearance here and there, like I said, it wasn't really until there was a Heroes for Hire book in 1996 where Marvel did attempt to revive the character. And this was kind of at the time when Several of their big hitters were licensed out, like we talked about that Fantastic Four run. So part of that Heroes Reborn era. Heroes for Hire was one of the Marvel titles where some of their leftover characters still around, like Iron Fist, Luke Cage, the Hulk was included in that, were sort of teamed up. That book lasted about 19 issues. And then you had Luke Cage came back in 2001 by Brian Michael Bendis in the excellent Alias series, which is sort of the series that gave us Jessica Jones. And led into that Netflix live action series. And in that Alias comic, just like in the TV show, Cage did have a relationship with Jessica Jones. Now, it was a lot more serious in that than the TV show, whereas I think just kind of more flippant in that. But, I mean, they end up getting married in the comics and having a baby in the comic books.
Yeah.
There was a Marvel Max series called Cage in 2002, which I remember reading that, but I did not enjoy that. I couldn't tell you why I didn't enjoy it, but I just remember I didn't keep it in my collection. And then in 2004 is when he really rose to prominence when he became one of the leads in the new Avengers series, again, also by Brian Michael Bendis.
Yeah.
And if you go back and check out our very first episode, we talk about New Avengers. That was the first episode that issue that we looked at. So Cage had prominent roles in the Civil War event, which we will be talking about early next year, Secret Invasion, the Dark Reign crossover event. So he had pretty prominent roles in several events, between 2006 and 2012, whatever it was. He did continue to make appearances in miniseries and other team books. In 2023, he had a brief tie-in series for the Gang War event, which I did buy, but I don't think I ever read it. I know I've got it, but I don't know that I've read it. At that point, he's been elected mayor of New York, and I think that's maybe where he's still serving at this time. When I last saw Cage, he was teased as one of the possible hosts for the Venom symbiote in a series called the All New Venom. It was not a good series, and the host turned out to be none of the people that they teased, and so I gave up on that series because I thought it was shit.
Nope.
All right, final thoughts on Cage, and let's ranking. Any final thoughts on this character or this book?
I just like how it gives a lot of exposition without really dragging it down too much. You don't have a whole lot of word vomit on the pages. It does tell a lot of his story in very short time frame.
Yeah, there was an art form to it too. Because you have a lot of expository dialogue, but it's done in such a way that it doesn't feel like it's expository dialogue.
Right.
In my opinion.
Well, and it not only that, but it makes me want to know more.
Right.
Because it gives you just enough of an appetizer to whet your appetite. You know what I mean?
And the way the art's laid out, too, now that I think about it, is it's not a bunch of just... Because one thing that I know, we mentioned Brian Michael Bendis a few times, one thing that he had a penchant for was just talking heads. 9 panels of just a head talking. Yeah. And you don't have that when we get that kind of info dump. The artist is not having to draw just talking heads. It's kind of one big panel or one big panel, and then all this dialogue is going on within the panel. So I think it flows better, I think, even from an artistic perspective, in my opinion, than if it was a bunch of talking heads going back and forth.
Yeah.
So, agreed. Anything else?
No, I think that's it.
Would you have bought this issue? Would you have at least read the next, skipped it, or do you want to wrap an electrified Kusari Fundo around your neck and choke yourself out?
As much fun as that sounds, I probably would have bought the next one.
Yeah.
And fun fact, Jonah actually bought me this one at Des Moines Con.
I did. I paid 50 cents for it.
Yeah. He just handed it to me. He's like, here you go. This will be good for you.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you did, because it's a really good comic book.
It is a good comic. It's funny because while I collected the entire series from start to finish, I would probably have to rank this as an at least read it. I don't know if I don't know if I could be like, hey, go buy this.
Well, and that's what
or go
sucks.
buy the next one. But at least check it out.
Marvel was going through so many financial issues at the time too that they were throwing anything against the wall to see what stuck.
Fuck, dude, they still do that.
Well, yeah, I know they do, but that's where runs like Darkhawk kind of, failed, I think, too.
Yeah.
In a way, is like you got, I don't know. It sucks that like when you get into something like this and then it's like, oh, it's only 20 issues long, so we can't see where he goes from here. We have to wait another.
And it's funny because at the time, 20 issues feels like a short run.
It's really not, though, when you think about it. It's
not in this day and age.
Yeah.
But at the time, when you had New Warriors that ran for like 75 issues, Ghost Rider ran for 100 issues or something like that. Punisher ran for nearly the same number of issues. And there was a time when Punisher had like 3 comics on the shelves at the same time that all ran for years.
Yeah.
And now the longest running comic at Marvel being published today, if I'm not mistaken, is Miles Morales' Spider-Man, and that's at like 38 or 39. The Fantastic Four would have been well into the mid-30s by now, but it got a reboot because of the movie, even though you didn't change the writer, or even it can't have even followed a ongoing story.
Yeah.
They gave it a new number 1 for some reason. And because of that, it kills any longevity that these series have. And I think I can understand the appeal to, hey, a new number 1 is going to give us maybe some new readers. But there's also an appeal to collectors who are probably going to buy it anyway, unfortunately, so they're never going to learn their lesson. But there's an appeal to collectors that they want that longevity.
Yeah.
They want, and I'm sorry, I hate the legacy numbering. It doesn't mean anything to me.
Right.
I could give a shit that issue 1 of something that we've read is issue 777 or whatever. Like, it doesn't mean, it means jack shit to me.
Yeah.
I want it to be consecutive. I want it to be long form. I love going back and I'm going back right now and reading Jason Aaron's Avengers run from just a couple of years ago, and that ran for like 65 issues.
Yeah. And
even that seems like an impossible feat today.
Right.
I think the actual Avengers comic, which is running right now, is okay at best, and that's in the 30s, and who knows how long it's going to be before they decide to reboot that again.
Right.
And if they do, hopefully they kind of reinvigorate it a little bit, because it's not resonating with me, unfortunately. As much as I love Jed McKay, it's just not resonating with me. But I'd love to see it. And it's funny because at the time 20 issues didn't feel like very long.
Yeah.
Especially as a kid, when I was like bummed that, oh man, I collected this whole thing and now it's over, but at least I have this whole complete, this run is complete. And that was awesome to me because I was new to comics. I was trying to pick up some back issues as I could, but when you're young and you're on a very tight budget or allowance, I couldn't go back and, like I said, the first issue of Punisher I bought was issue 60. I couldn't go back and buy the first 59 issues.
Right.
At least not until I was an adult. Right. And so
I ran into that a lot with the Spider-Man comics. My dad collected a lot of them, but he didn't have the entire run of Amazing Spider-Man, for example. And there'd be those 1 or 2 issues I'd read at like issue 375 that would say, using this as an example, don't quote me on it, but like it would say, see, it'd have the editor's note, like, see Amazing Spider-Man 64. And I'd be like, hey, Dad, do you have that one? No, I don't. Okay, well, if I tried to go and collect that as a, 12-year-old kid, who knows how much it would have been trying to go and find that one specific issue. But, I digress.
Yep, these are for anyone who's not a comic collector, who's probably not listening to this anyway, these are the things that we have to put up with, that we make mountains out of molehills about.
Yes, exactly.
But That's going to do it for us for this episode. Again, we were talking about Cage, and thanks for joining us. Special thanks to everyone at Field of Geeks for helping to make this podcast happen. Special thanks to Raven X for the theme song. Be sure to like and subscribe. Follow us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Just check out Field of Geeks. Also, find us on YouTube at Field of Geeks. On Facebook, you can check out our Facebook page at the Number One Comics Podcast. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, no problem.
Peace, everybody.
See ya.